Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Wonderful to see you all. I'll be talking today about a very popular spiritual teacher named Eckhart Tolle. I'm sure many of you have heard of him and maybe even have read some of his work, watched some of his videos, maybe attended a workshop or two of his, although I hear they might be expensive. I might be the first Ramakrishna monk to be speaking about Eckhart Tolle's spiritual philosophy in some detail. But I think it's a good sign of any healthy organization or tradition to be open to learning from other traditions. So it's in that spirit that I'll be talking about Tolle today. And I'm not just going to be arguing that he's just repeating what we already know as Vedantins, but that there's something genuinely original in his thinking and in his teachings that we can learn from as spiritual aspirants. A little background, Eckhart Tolle. He himself describes his spiritual awakening. He said that in his late 20s, he was extremely depressed and was contemplating suicide. And then he finally decided to call it quits with his life. And he describes his experience as follows. This is at the age of 29. This is from The Power of Now. He says, "I cannot live with myself any longer." That's what he thought. This was the thought that kept repeating itself in my mind. Then, suddenly, I became aware of what a peculiar thought it was. Am I one or two? If I cannot live with myself, there must be two of me, the I and the self that I cannot live with. Maybe, I thought, only one of them is real. I was so stunned by this strange realization that my mind stopped. I was fully conscious, but there were no more thoughts. In Vedantic terms, it seems as if he, in this moment of awakening, realized that he was a non-dual self witnessing the mind, that he was not the mind, he was not the unhappy self, but he took a step back from that unhappy self. It's not even taking a step back implies conscious decision. It wasn't a conscious thing. It was the suffering itself forced him to break his identification with this unhappy self. And he realized he was witness consciousness. Any of you who are familiar with Vedanta might be struck by a similarity in the awakening experience of one of the great Indian Advaita Vedantins, Ramana Maharshi. At about the age of 16, he was sitting in his uncle's house, and he suddenly realized he was going to die. And at first he became frightened, but then he just lay on the floor like a corpse to feel like what is it like to be dead. And then he had a very similar realization that it's the body that dies, but that consciousness persists forever. Consciousness is eternal, and he is that witness consciousness. So the experiences are very similar, I'd say. I'll be drawing today on two books in particular of Eckhart Tolle's, The Power of Now, which many of you I'm sure have read, and A New Earth. So Power of Now was published in 1999, A New Earth 6 years later in 2005. Tolle is now 76 years old, I think. Extremely popular. He was on Oprah. Don't hold that against him. And one thing that I like about Tolle, there are a lot of things I like about him. There's so many popular spiritual gurus out there, and he's my favorite. Part of the reason is, it's one thing to read someone's teachings and appreciate them. Another thing is to see them as human beings And if you look at his videos on YouTube, I really feel that there's a real humility and genuineness in him, and that he's speaking from a place of experience rather than just the intellect. But you can judge for yourself. So if you ask what spiritual tradition does he belong to, I think his answer would be that he doesn't want to affiliate himself with any tradition in particular. And that his teachings come from his own experience, from that awakening experience, which then deepened in the course of his spiritual practice. But after that awakening experience, he started reading around in the world's religious scriptures and spiritual traditions, and he realized, wait a minute, there are uncanny similarities between what I experienced and am experiencing, and what these great saints and sages, especially in Eastern traditions, talk about, like Buddhism, Vedanta. But it would be a mistake to think that he was influenced by these traditions. I mean, that's a very scholarly way of thinking, and like as if he's an intellectual taking ideas, putting them together. He had the awakening experience, and then he found similarities and parallels in other spiritual traditions. In A New Earth, he refers to the Kena Upanishad, one of the great Vedantic scriptures. There's a famous mantra, Yan manasa namanute yena hurmano matam tadeva brahmatvam vidhi nedam yadidam upasate. He quotes that. He says, what cannot be thought with the mind, but that whereby the mind can think. Know that alone to be Brahman the Spirit, and not what people here adore. And then Tolle goes on to give his own interpretation of this Upanishadic mantra. He says, God, the scripture is saying, is formless consciousness and the essence of who you are. Everything else is form, is, quote, what people here adore. So what is his overall spiritual philosophy? I think that in certain respects it's very similar to the Advaita Vedanta philosophy of Shankaracharya, the great 8th century Advaita Vedantin. Because again and again, Tolle is encouraging us to break our identification with what he calls the voice in the head. It's a beautiful expression he uses, which I think is very apt. He says that one day he walks into a bus. He says it's a very typical experience. You go into a bus in the US, and there's often or a subway, let's say. There's often a crazy person, or what you think is a crazy person, who's talking to himself or herself. And he says the interesting thing is, if you think about it, each one of us is like that crazy person. It's just that that person is honest enough to talk out loud. Every single one of us has a voice in his head or her head, chattering away, endlessly, maddeningly, obsessively. But we don't think we're crazy. We think it's that person on the bus who's crazy. So how do we break our identification with that voice in the head and realize our true identity as formless consciousness? This is very, very Vedantic, and specifically Advaita Vedantic. In A New Earth, he says this really nicely. He says, the little me is an illusion that obscures your true identity as timeless and formless presence. And the main spiritual practice he encourages throughout his work is, this is the way I'd put it, is a combination of Buddhist mindfulness and the path of knowledge in Advaita Vedanta, Jnana Yoga. Buddhist mindfulness, many of you are familiar with the practice, but the basic idea is that you should take a step back from your feelings, your thoughts, from your body, and just be mindful of what's happening at the level of the body, what's happening at the level of feeling, what's happening at the level of mind. Mindfulness in the sense of non-judgmental awareness. And the non-judgmental part is really important. It's not this kind of superego in the sense of Freud, constantly judging, this is a bad thought, this is a good thought. Not like that. Non-judgmental, calm, witness consciousness, witness awareness. But it's not purely Buddhist mindfulness either. Some people think that he's predominantly Buddhist in his outlook. I think there's a very strong Vedantic element. And what is that? It's because he emphasizes again and again our true nature as the eternal witness consciousness. This is something you don't find in most Buddhist traditions. Buddhism is famous for its no-self doctrine, anatta in Pali, no self. And so when it teaches mindfulness, it doesn't say identify with the witness consciousness. That itself is another form of illusion, according to most Buddhists. But in Vedanta, it says that by taking a step back from the psychophysical complex, you're actually identifying with your true nature as eternal consciousness, as the witness consciousness, as the Atman. That's the Sanskrit term in Vedanta. So I really do see his spiritual practice as a combination of Buddhist mindfulness and Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge found in Vedanta. At the same time, we can't just equate Tolle's spiritual philosophy with Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, because there are some important differences. One of the most important of which is how they look upon this world of names and forms. Shankara famously said, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. Brahman alone is real, so non-dual pure consciousness alone is real. Everything else is an illusion. Tolle never says that, at least as far as I'm aware. We can argue about it in the Q&A later. What I see him saying instead is that the world itself is a manifestation of consciousness. And so it seems to me that Tolle's spiritual philosophy comes closest to what I would call the integral Advaita Vedanta of certain modern Vedantins in our tradition, Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, and Sri Aurobindo. Because I would argue that Eckhart Tolle champions, he's still alive, champions a life-affirming, non-dual philosophy. And in that sense, it's an integral Advaita, it's an integral non-duality that accepts everything as a manifestation of divine consciousness. A.S. Dalal, I think he might be alive, but anyway, he was alive until recently, I think at least. And he might still be, no offense to him. I should have done my homework on that. He was or is a disciple of Sri Aurobindo and started reading Eckhart Tolle's teachings and was blown away and was very moved. And he thought, wow, clearly he's speaking from a place of spiritual awakening, but I'm already a follower of Sri Aurobindo, but I also see similarities, I see differences. And so he sought out Eckhart Tolle, he met him, and he talked to him, and Tolle encouraged A.S. Dalal to write a book comparing Tolle's teachings with Sri Aurobindo's. And so he did that. He published a book in 2008, Dalal, D-A-L-A-L, called Eckhart Tolle and Sri Aurobindo, Two Perspectives on Enlightenment. It's well worth checking out, and it's open access, so you can just download the book for free if you're interested. So I'm drawing on that to some extent, but it's mostly based on my own understanding of Vedanta and my own understanding of Tolle's teachings. So first of all, what are some of the similarities between the integral Advaita tradition of Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, and Sri Aurobindo on the one hand, and Eckhart Tolle on the other? How do they look upon the nature of ultimate reality? Like integral Advaita, Eckhart Tolle holds that divine consciousness, he doesn't use the word divine exactly, he just says consciousness with a capital C. But that consciousness is impersonal in one dimension and personal in another. And people who are familiar with Tolle might be surprised to hear that I'm saying that Tolle also believed in consciousness as personal. So let me give you some evidence for this. First of all, this is from Dalal's book. Dalal says, Eckhart speaks of the reality as endowed with personal attributes such as intelligence, love, and benevolence. This is language used by Tolle himself. And as the power that operates in the universe and which has an impetus to manifest itself by an evolution of consciousness. Such a concept of being is quite close to Sri Aurobindo's concept of the divine, the supreme being. So Dalal notices this parallel because in Sri Aurobindo's integral Advaita philosophy, the ultimate has two different aspects, two different dimensions. One is the impersonal, non-dual dimension, which you can realize as your true nature in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, but it also has divine consciousness has a personal dimension, which he calls Chit Shakti, consciousness force, which manifests as everything in this world. Now notice how similar Eckhart Tolle's language is. He says the following. This is a quote from A New Earth. Tolle says, "The twofold reality of the universe, which consists of things and space." By space, he means something technical. He doesn't mean physical space, but formless presence. It's a metaphorical kind of spaciousness, so in that sense, space, which consists of things and space. Thingness and no-thingness. It's a pun. Not nothingness, no-thingness. Again, referring to the spaciousness dimension of formless consciousness. He says, "The twofold reality of the universe, which consists of things and space, thingness and no-thingness, is also your own. A sane, balanced, and fruitful human life is a dance between the two dimensions that make up reality, form and space. Most people are so identified with the dimension of form, with sense perceptions, thoughts, and emotion, that the vital hidden half is missing from their lives. Their identification with form keeps them trapped in ego." And then he says, "What you see, hear, feel, touch, or think about is only one half of reality, so to speak. It is form. In the teaching of Jesus, it is simply called the world, and the other dimension is the kingdom of heaven or eternal life." So notice again and again he's emphasizing the twofold reality of what? Form on the one hand, names and forms, everything we see in this world, as a real manifestation of consciousness. And at the same time, the other half is formless consciousness, both of which are real. So whereas Shankara says Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, Brahman alone is real, this world of names and forms is an illusion, Eckhart Tolle says both Brahman, formless consciousness, and all names and forms are just the two sides of the same coin, the two dimensions of reality, both of which are real. Another thing to keep in mind, Tolle, you'll find, especially if you read A New Earth, this is more prominent in A New Earth than in The Power of Now. There's an evolutionary dimension to Tolle's philosophy, which is very similar to Sri Aurobindo's. Let me read you another passage from A New Earth. Tolle says, "Consciousness is the intelligence, the organizing principle behind the arising of form. Consciousness has been preparing forms for millions of years so that it can express itself through them in the manifested." So notice the language. First of all, he's describing consciousness as intelligence, which is itself kind of too personal for the tastes of followers of Shankara. Because it does imply a personal intelligence that's actually who's creating and governing this world in such a way as to manifest itself gradually in the course of an evolutionary process, in the course of millions of years. Even more strikingly Aurobindonian language can be found in A New Earth. He says, he has this beautiful phrase, he says, Tolle now, he refers to the descent of the divine into matter. The descent of the divine into matter. This could be taken straight out of the Life Divine of Sri Aurobindo. Because Sri Aurobindo has this concept of what he calls divine descent. That is, there's a twofold realization in spiritual life. The first is ascending to the divine, transcending this world of names and forms, and ascending to the divine. Then there's a subsequent spiritual movement when the divine descends into, even at the level of matter, it descends into this world so that we can divinize life here on earth. That's why Sri Aurobindo's magnum opus is called The Life Divine. And notice the similarity with Tolle's title, A New Earth. It's extremely similar, this basically a very similar idea. In another place in A New Earth, Tolle says, "On our planet, the human ego represents the final stage of universal sleep, the identification of consciousness with form. It was a necessary stage in the evolution of consciousness." Again, almost word for word, this can be taken from Sri Aurobindo. I'm not claiming that he was influenced by Sri Aurobindo. I think he discovered Sri Aurobindo after the awakening, and then noticed that there are a lot of parallels, and then even encouraged Dalal, as I said, to write a book on it. And a little bit later in A New Earth, Tolle says, "We are in the midst of a momentous event in the evolution of human consciousness." So this is very important, this evolutionary dimension to Tolle's philosophy. The idea is that we are now at the level of ego. We're very mind-identified, but that this is not the end of the spiritual evolutionary process, and that we still have a ways to go. And that the next stage is one in which we break our identification with the mind, with the voice in the head, and realize our identity as divine consciousness. And fourth, I think I've covered 3 points, but now I want to emphasize the fourth. What are the ethical implications of non-duality? And I think here again we find really striking parallels between the integral Advaita tradition of Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, and Sri Aurobindo, and Eckhart Tolle's philosophy. You might be wondering so far, well, what makes Tolle's philosophy non-dual? There are a lot of Indian spiritual traditions that talk about witness consciousness that are not non-dual. What are examples? Sankhya, Yoga, Jainism. All of these talk about how our true nature is eternal consciousness, separate from the psychophysical complex. But Tolle emphasizes again and again that formless presence is non-dual. He says the following: "In the stillness of presence, you can sense the formless essence in yourself and in the other as one. Knowing the oneness of yourself and the other is true love, true care, true compassion." Anybody who's familiar with our tradition, the Vedantic tradition, will hear echoes of what? For instance, Sri Ramakrishna, he used to say, "Shiva Jnane Jiva Seva," in Bengali, Shiv Jnane Jiva Seva, which means you should serve others in a spirit of worship by trying to see the divine in everyone. That's the ethics of non-duality, according to Ramakrishna. Swami Vivekananda called that practical Vedanta. Serving others, helping others, practicing compassion toward others by seeing the same divine that you see in yourself in others. And I also want to mention, I'm not equating the integral Advaita in our tradition with Tolle's. There are also differences. I think at the level of spiritual practice, I would say that one of the differences is that Eckhart Tolle usually emphasizes one spiritual practice as the best. And it's this kind of, as I said, this combination of Buddhist mindfulness and Jnana Yoga. Identify with formless consciousness separate from the psychophysical complex. Be the witness to your thoughts. That's Jnana Yoga in Vedanta. But one thing that's nice about the integral Advaita tradition of Ramakrishna is that they embrace all of the main spiritual paths and practices, and they can be generalized into the 4 yogas. I think I've talked about this in previous talks here, but I'll just very quickly say. What are the 4 yogas? Apart from Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge, we have Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of devotion, Karma Yoga, the yoga of selfless service, and Raja Yoga, the yoga of concentration and meditation. And integral Advaita, integral Vedanta, encourages us to synthesize and harmonize all 4 of these yogas in our daily life. And I'm not saying that's totally absent in Tolle's philosophy, but the emphasis is predominantly on the path of knowledge, or kind of mindfulness, this sort of Vedantic mindfulness technique. But I think that technique can be fruitfully combined with devotional practices and with selfless service. So now, that was all just kind of, so this is already a half hour, but this is all just background to get into the main topic for today, which is one specific concept of Eckhart Tolle's called the pain body. Why, out of all the concepts in his work and in his teachings, why focus on the pain body? Because I think here's another one of my suggestions. I think it's his most original concept. I think it's his most original contribution to the world's spiritual literature. And by original, I don't mean it's completely new and that it's unprecedented and that you don't find it in ancient scriptures or traditions. No, that's not what I mean. But there's definitely an original flavor to it and an original twist. And the way he explains the pain body is especially helpful for us as spiritual aspirants. And I want to explain why that's the case, why I think that's the case at least. So, what exactly is the pain body? He gives a very simple definition in A New Earth. He calls it, the pain body is an accumulation of old emotional pain. And in The Power of Now, he actually refers to it as an energy field. He calls it an energy field of old but still very much alive emotion that lives in almost every human being. So it's a kind of negative energy field that dwells within us. How does this pain body form? He says, any negative emotion that is not fully faced and seen for what it is in the moment it arises does not completely dissolve. It leaves behind a remnant of pain. It leaves behind a remnant of pain, which goes into the pain body. And the pain body consists of all of these different remnants of pain. All the different negative feelings we've experienced in our life that we weren't mindful enough to accept at the time and to kind of let go of. We sort of tried to avoid them, not think about them, not face them head on. And then they unconsciously became part of our pain body. What are examples of negative emotions? We all know, but anger, depression, anxiety, fear, hurt, grievance, resentment, jealousy, bitterness, hatred. It can be anything, and all of the above. But in general, you'll find that each pain body is unique. Each one of us might have a different kind of pain body, and that there's one predominant negative feeling that is sort of paramount in that pain body, based on our own life experiences and how we dealt with our negative emotions in our past. To make things a little bit more concrete, so imagine that someone close to you hurts you. So the spiritual, the mindful way to deal with it would be to accept the feeling of being hurt. If you can do that, then you stop the process in its tracks, and then it doesn't form part of the pain body. But if you don't like to acknowledge the fact that you felt hurt, what happens? That feeling of hurt becomes a remnant of pain that gets part of the pain body. Okay, so one question. Is there an equivalent or a close equivalent to Tolle's concept of the pain body in Indian spiritual traditions? And we can talk about this in the Q&A. You can think about it for yourself. Well, what is there in Vedanta? Actually, I should have titled this talk. They're different. Yeah, suffering. That's good. That's not just Vedanta. That's just any spiritual philosophy. I called this talk "The Pain Body: A Vedantic Perspective," but I should have called it "The Pain Body: A Yoga-Vedantic Perspective." Yoga and Vedanta have a lot of similarities, but there are also some differences. But I think both of these Indian spiritual traditions are very rich in helping us understand the pain body. So I'll ask Brahmachari Anant to revise the title when it goes up on YouTube. So, in the philosophies of Vedanta and Yoga, any negative emotion leaves what Tolle calls a remnant of pain. What's the Sanskrit equivalent of this remnant of pain? Samskara. Yeah, I heard somebody mutter samskara. Samskara is the Sanskrit term. A latent mental impression caused by a klesha. We'll get to that in a second. It means an affliction in yoga philosophy. And which resides in the unconscious, in the chitta, but which can get triggered at any moment. Okay. So, in yoga philosophy, so before I get to yoga, so the pain body, we can put it in Yoga-Vedantic terms as follows. The pain body is comprised of negative samskaras resulting from our past thoughts and actions. And I think that the closest equivalent to Tolle's pain body is found in the yoga philosophy. It might be found in other traditions. I might just not know them well enough. But in yoga, I think it's called the karmashaya. Karmashaya. Yoga Sutra 2.12. Klesha mulaha karmashayaha drishta adrishta vedaniyaha. The translation is, karmashaya is the storehouse of samskaras, latent mental impressions, resulting from kleshas, afflictions, which will be experienced either in this life, that's what the sutra refers to as drishta, which literally means seen, that means the life right now, that we're living now, or in a future life, adrishta, an unseen life, which means a future life. So this requires a bit of unpacking and explanation. In Yoga Sutra 2.3, 5 afflictions are mentioned, kleshas. Avidya, which is spiritual ignorance, ignorance of our true nature as witness consciousness, separate from the psychophysical complex. Egoism, which we all know well. Attachment, raga. Aversion, dvesha. And abhinivesha, which means desire for continued existence as an empirical individual. And so notice, in this sutra, 2.12, it has built into it the ideas of karma and rebirth as well. It's these samskaras in our pain body, in this karmashaya, that makes us reap what we sow. We think that after a very unpleasant experience, after some kind of negative feeling, that we're past it. No, it's stored as a remnant of pain, as Tolle puts it, in our unconscious. And it can come up again at any moment, the moment it's triggered. And it can come up either in this life, as it often does, or in a future life. So you might ask, well, so does Tolle believe in these doctrines of karma and rebirth? I think he does. Let me read you another passage from A New Earth. Tolle says, every newborn who comes into this world already carries an emotional pain body. In some, it is heavier, more dense than in others. Some babies are quite happy most of the time. Others seem to carry an enormous amount of unhappiness within them. It's very interesting. Babies already have their respective pain bodies from what? From previous lives, obviously. Right? He's even more explicit about rebirth in a later passage in A New Earth. He says, when the lion tears apart the body of the zebra, the consciousness that incarnated into the zebra form detaches itself from the dissolving form and for a brief moment awakens to its essential immortal nature as consciousness, and then immediately falls back into sleep and reincarnates into another form. So Tolle explicitly accepts both karma and reincarnation, and the pain body, his concept of the pain body, is intertwined with these concepts of karma and rebirth. And I think that the Yoga Sutra concept of karmashaya helps us to understand from an Indian standpoint what Tolle might be talking about by the pain body. So, Tolle's pain body is not exactly new. I'm not claiming it is. But what is so original and so helpful from a spiritual standpoint about Tolle's concept of the pain body? He says you should look upon this pain body as a quasi-living entity. This is new. This I don't think you find in the Indian spiritual traditions. He says the following in A New Earth. He says, the pain body is a semi-autonomous energy form that lives within most human beings, an entity made up of emotion. It has its own primitive intelligence, not unlike a cunning animal. And its intelligence is directed primarily at survival. Like all life forms, it periodically needs to feed, to take in new energy. And the food it requires to replenish itself consists of energy that is compatible with its own, which is to say, energy that vibrates at a similar frequency. Any emotionally painful experience can be used as food by the pain body. That's why it thrives on negative thinking as well as drama in relationships. The pain body is an addiction to unhappiness. So I think this is very suggestive and very helpful. What is Tolle saying? He's not saying that there's this creepy living entity in us, like a homunculus. But he's saying it's almost like that. It's almost like some kind of sci-fi horror film. In fact, in one of his videos, he likens the pain body to a particular character from The Lord of the Rings. And so now an LOTR quiz for you guys. Which character is he likening the pain body to? Any guesses? Gollum. Well done. Very quick to the... Yeah. Gollum. If any of you have seen Lord of the Rings, precious! Sorry, that was creepy. Tolle He says the pain body is like Gollum, this creepy, gruesome, but from another aspect, a little cute too, you got to admit. There's a little cute aspect to it too. So it's both. And actually, if you start looking upon this gruesome creature as a little cute, that actually is part of that's part of the process of taking a step back, you know? Don't take it so seriously. Don't be so frightened by this Gollum pain body. So yeah, Tolle treats the pain body as a semi or quasi-living entity, like a parasite, or even like think about COVID. It's a virus. Is a virus living or dead? It's kind of both. It's not quite alive, and yet it behaves like a living entity. It's looking for food. It wants to reproduce itself. It wants to grow, right? In our tradition, what might this remind us of? During Sri Ramakrishna's period of spiritual practice, when he's in the depth of meditation, he has a vision of what he called in Bengali Papa Purusha. How would you translate it? Like a sinful being, but like a being that embodies sin. Papa Purusha. It's terrible. He said it has bloodshot red eyes, and it's the embodiment of all the negative qualities in life that make us selfish and egoistic. And then in the same vision, he visualizes a sannyasi, a monk, who takes a trident and kills the Papa Purusha. But I think that's a similar. There's a parallel here. The idea is when you're able to give a kind of form to all of your negative emotions and feelings and tendencies, it's a really helpful way of just saying, that's not me. That's so-and-so, but that's not me. That's that person who took over temporarily. You see what I mean? I think that's why it's so helpful for sadhana, to think of the pain body as a kind of semi-autonomous entity, as a kind of golem living within us. And the beauty of it is, the moment you recognize Gollum as Gollum, you realize that Gollum never existed. You see, it was a phantom all along. You gave it life by being unconscious of it, by not being mindful of it. So the pain body, according to Tolle, in most people is usually dormant, most of the time, until it gets triggered or activated. But when it does get triggered, what happens? The pain body, in people who are unmindful, it completely takes over the personality. And it's like you're a different person. You say and do things which are very hurtful, terrible, very unlike what you would normally say and do under similar circumstances. So the pain body has a way of hijacking the mind. The moment it's triggered, that becomes the voice in your head. And it becomes a voice of negativity. And you might ask, well, if the pain body's so bad, why in the world would we cater to it? Why would we identify with it? He gives a very profound answer. He says, you have made an unhappy self out of your pain body and believe that this mind-made fiction is who you are. In that case, unconscious fear of losing your identity will create strong resistance to any disidentification. In other words, you would rather be in pain, be the pain body, than take a leap into the unknown and risk losing the familiar, unhappy self. For many of us, this is the tragedy. We derive our identity from the pain body, from our negative emotions, because we're terrified of what we are apart from that. That's all we know. So breaking our identification with the pain body requires some risk, a certain amount of courage, because we have to step into the unknown and explore who we really are beyond the psychophysical complex and beyond the pain body. So, I keep talking about how the pain body can get triggered, that it's usually dormant, but that it gets triggered. What are these triggers? It depends. Each one of us has different triggers, depending on the nature of our pain body. And a really important part of spiritual practice is identifying the specific triggers. What specifically triggers your pain body? I'll give you an example. Imagine that a child, this is an example taken from Tolle's A New Earth. Imagine a child who's abandoned by one or both of his or her parents when he or she was very young. Very traumatic. Obviously, a child who's 5 or 6 is not able to assimilate those feelings, those negative emotions properly, what happens? They leave behind remnants of pain that form this child's pain body, which is predominantly composed of this feeling of hurt, the feeling of being abandoned. This child grows into an adult. What are the triggers to this pain body, to this particular person's pain body? It could be as simple as this person has just arrived at an airport, a friend is supposed to pick him up, he's waiting, and the friend is 5 minutes late, and this person starts freaking out. Why is he late? Where is he? Is he going to come? Nobody likes me. And like, you go into this tailspin of negativity, and it's obviously a complete overreaction, and the person who's undergoing that state doesn't realize that it's because the pain body has been triggered. My friend has abandoned me. And then immediately, the whole force of that whole pain body, of that old accumulated pain from the child's entire life, comes in full force in that moment. And if somebody's with that person at the time, that person will think, is this person insane? Actually, what's happening is that the pain body is taken over. So now, what should that person do in that moment? Yeah, be mindful. What triggers the pain body, exactly when it gets triggered, how it gets triggered. So Tolle says the following: when you recognize your own pain body as it arises, you will also quickly learn what the most common triggers are that activate it, whether it be situations or certain things other people do or say. When those triggers occur, you will immediately see them for what they are and enter a heightened state of alertness. Within a second or two, you will also notice the emotional reaction that is the arising pain body. But in that state of alert presence, you won't identify with it, which means the pain body cannot take you over and become the voice in your head. This is really important. The technique is actually fairly simple. The moment your pain body gets triggered, just notice that. Notice and say, oops, that's Gollum raising his head again. And the moment you do that, you can take a step back from Gollum, from the pain body. And you don't allow that negative emotion to add to that pain body that you already have. And every time you do that, every time you're able to catch yourself, the moment your pain body gets triggered, you're actually diminishing, you're actually reducing, you're helping to dissolve that pain body and breaking your identification with the pain body. So it's as simple as non-judgmental awareness of the triggers of the pain body and of the pain body itself when it becomes active. The moment you're aware of the active pain body, it becomes dormant and it becomes shy. It doesn't like being found out. That's the thing about the pain body, like Gollum. So one thing I mentioned earlier, but which is really important, Tolle says this pain body, like an entity, it needs to feed, like any creature, right? It feeds on negative emotions, not just in its own host, right, which is us, but from others. And so the pain body thrives on close relationships. It could be a romantic partner, a spouse, a partner. It can be family. These are some of the best triggers for the pain body and the best food for the pain body. Delicious food. And as a constant, all-you-can-eat buffet. I grew up in Boston, and my dad used to love buffets, so he'd take me to the buffets, and I'm the opposite. I get full really quickly, and so he'd take me to this place called Ponderosa. I found it disgusting. But anyway, so it's like that. A Ponderosa all-you-can-eat buffet of pain body triggering. So Tolle talks about this. There are a couple of videos that where he talks about the pain body and close relationships, and he says, you know, in the West, of course, there's a lot of dating before marriage. In India, often it's arranged marriage. You decide to marry someone, or your parents decide for you, and then you marry. You don't even know who this person is. 6 months into the marriage, suddenly you're like, who is this person? And Tolle says, that's the pain body. And you're discovering your partner's pain body for the first time. In the West, of course, there's a whole long period of living together and dating and all that stuff, and so you actually can get to know the person. So in a way, that's very helpful, because you can at least, when you actually decide to marry the person, you're marrying the pain body along with the normal person. You're taking the whole package. So what does Tolle say about how people in these close relationships with their spouses, with their partners, with loved ones, family members, how do you deal with other people's pain bodies in close relationships, but also your own pain body? You shouldn't forget, you should never think that, you should never focus on other people's pain bodies and pretend that you don't have a pain body. We all have pain bodies. So you should ask yourself, in this relationship, when is my pain body triggered? And when is his or her pain body triggered? And in an enlightened relationship, Tolle really recommends a kind of enlightened way of relating to your loved ones. What does that mean? It means, first of all, reading his books. and then being frank and open about the pain body. And the moment your partner becomes someone else, what you can say is, hey, I think that's your pain body acting up again. Now, of course, the problem is, that might make your partner even angrier. And it gets tricky because the pain body is a wily little creature, as Gollum is. And so sometimes it could be your own ego making you think that it's the pain body of your partner that's become active, when in fact it's your own pain body. So it gets complicated, but in any case, if you're both honest with yourselves and honest with each other, I think this is a really helpful, and this is an ongoing process. It doesn't happen overnight. And be gentle, you know. And actually, you can tell when it's the ego rather than the enlightened, person in you that's saying it's your pain body acting up. You know what it is? The pain body can be detected by any emotional overreaction. So if your partner's behaving badly, what you judge to be behaving badly, and the tone of your voice is sharp, cutting, demeaning, and you say, there's your pain body again. It's probably your own pain body. But if you can say it calmly, non-judgmentally, compassionately, then that could be a sign that you're on the right track. And your partner is not going to be so quick to respond in just as instinctively emotional and in a kind of overreactive manner. Do you see what I mean? So that's the goal that I think people in close relationships should work toward. And he was actually asked this question in one of his videos. How do you deal with the partner's pain body? And he gives a very nuanced answer, which I appreciate. He says that, well, it depends on how unconscious your partner is in that moment. If the partner is fully unconscious, totally unconscious, not in the sense of actually not having external consciousness, but in the sense of being completely identified with the pain body, then anything you say or do is going to just anger that person more. Anything. Saying that it's a pain body is going to make that person furious, but even forget about it. Even remaining silent will make that person angry. So what Tolle says is better to just be quiet and compassionate and then quietly leave the room. Come back later when that person has calmed down and the pain body can go. But then he says there's another possibility. If there's even a remnant of awareness, he says, then you can deal with that person a little bit differently. Then you can say gently, again, non-judgmentally, compassionately, hey, I think that might be your pain body acting up. And in that case, that person, your partner, may not react so badly. But it's all about tone, it's about the small things, how you say things rather than what you're saying. Another example. This is common, actually. A young girl is abused by her father in some way. It could be physical abuse, could be verbal abuse, or otherwise. And so the pain body of this poor child is that of primarily being hurt by her father in some way. What happens when she grows into an adult? Often what happens is they seek out male partners who are like their father, who are abusive in some way. And you might be thinking, why in the world would they do that? This is crazy. This is madness. It is a kind of madness. But from Eckhart Tolle's perspective, what he'll say is, it's that woman's pain body that was formed as a young girl that's looking for food, that's looking for more of the same negative energy. And that person is so closely identified with the pain body that she doesn't recognize that. And so she'll go through the same pattern again and again until she's able to recognize the pain body for what it is, acknowledge the deep hurt that she felt as a child in her relationship with her father, And then she'll be able to move on and have more healthy relationships with other people. So, how do we break our identification with the pain body? I've already kind of given some hints about that. The pain body thrives on our unconscious identification with it. So long as we're not aware of the pain body, we are identified with it. The moment we become aware of the pain body, we break our identification with it. It's as simple as that. He says, the pain body may seem to you like a dangerous monster that you cannot bear to look at, like Gollum. But I assure you that it is an insubstantial phantom that cannot prevail against the power of your presence. He says, the pain body doesn't want you to observe it directly and see it for what it is. The moment you observe it, feel its energy field within you, and take your attention into it, the identification is broken. A higher dimension of consciousness has come in. I call it presence. You are now the witness or the watcher of the pain body. This means that it cannot use you anymore by pretending to be you, and it can no longer replenish itself through you. Okay. So what's important here? Don't fight with the pain body. That's counterproductive in spiritual life. Just acknowledge it. Be aware of it, and be non-judgmentally aware, calmly aware. Almost like you look at a 5-year-old doing naughty things. Oh, there's Gollum again, doing his Gollum thing. So Tolle says this. He gives a little bit more concrete steps in this passage. He says, focus attention on the feeling inside you. Know that it is the pain body. Accept that it is there. Don't think about it. Don't let the feeling turn into thinking. Don't judge or analyze. Don't make an identity for yourself out of it. Stay present and continue to be the observer of what is happening inside you. Become aware not only of the emotional pain, but also of the one who observes, the silent watcher. This is the power of the now, the power of your own conscious presence. Then see what happens. So it's a very simple technique, but you have to try it to reap its benefits. And another very succinct statement he makes, which I find very helpful. He says, the remnants of pain left behind by every strong negative emotion that is not fully faced, accepted, and then let go of, join together to form an energy field that lives in the very cells of your body. So how do we avoid this process? 3 steps. Recognize the pain body the moment it gets triggered, the moment it arises. Recognition. Second, acceptance. Acceptance. Don't run away from it, just accept it, even though it's painful, but accept it. And if you can do that, if you can recognize that negative emotion the moment it arises, if you can accept it, then you'll be able to let it go. That's the 3rd step. And by letting it go, that it doesn't leave a remnant of pain that becomes part of the pain body. In my previous talk here last month, it was on self-deception and spiritual life. Some of you attended that talk, I think. I talked a lot about spiritual bypassing and about how some people turn to spiritual life for the wrong reasons. Sometimes with mixed motives. So some people can have genuinely spiritual motives, and then also this spiritual bypassing could be another part or one motivation among others. But what does spiritual bypassing mean? It means you have this very strong and active pain body. You have these very strong negative emotions. You have certain psychological issues, sources of pain in your life that you haven't sufficiently dealt with. Somebody who's just lost a loved one, a partner, imagine. Somebody that you've lived with for 50 or 60 years suddenly dies. And instead of just confronting that emotion, accepting it, recognizing it for what it is, you sort of run away from it by running into a church or a temple. So I'm not saying that if a loved one dies, you shouldn't come to temple, you shouldn't come to these talks. That's not what I'm saying. But it's all about your motives and what's going on inside. Are you turning to spirituality as a way of running away from your problems and issues, or as a way of facing them mindfully? That makes a world of difference. So spiritual bypassing involves just not even getting to the first step of this Tolle's technique of mindfulness. The moment a negative emotion arises, what happens? You don't recognize it or accept it for what it is. You run away from it. That's the problem. So this whole concept of the pain body is an extremely helpful way of avoiding spiritual bypassing. Because it tells us, recognize the pain body the moment it acts up, the moment you feel a negative emotion, and then accept it for what it is, no matter how painful it is in the moment. And then you're going to find, as you just calmly and non-judgmentally just let it sit there, that it'll diminish in intensity, in pain. And then it won't become part of the pain body, and you can just let it go. It'll just drop off. This is a very powerful technique. It's one that Buddhists have recognized for thousands of years, and Vedantins. But recently there are a lot of scientific studies coming out showing the benefits of the kind of mindfulness encouraged by Tolle. Analayo, who's he's a German Buddhist monk in the Theravada tradition. He's written an entire book on Buddhist mindfulness called Satipatthana, A Direct Path to Realization. And there he quotes a scientific study from the 70s about a 23-year-old male who has a history of extreme aggression, physical violence, alcohol abuse. And the treatment was a doctor coming in, a psychiatrist or someone, not saying that this is a Buddhist technique or not even calling it mindfulness. He called it the technique of mental labeling. He said, anytime a thought to drink arises in your mind, anytime a thought of aggression or violence arises in your mind, just label it mentally. Label it mentally, that's it. And in 8 weeks, the person was cured. And since then, many more studies have replicated the results of this study. In 2018, there was a meta-study of 37 of these studies, and they found mindfulness-based therapy and techniques extremely effective in dealing with substance abuse disorders, psychological disorders, anxiety, depression, and so on. Another thing I'll mention is you shouldn't feel discouraged if you have a particularly heavy or active pain body. There's a brilliant section in Tolle's book, A New Earth, where he refers to the pain body as an awakener. As an awakener. He says, people with heavy pain bodies usually have a better chance to awaken spiritually than those with a relatively light one. Whereas some of them do remain trapped in their heavy pain bodies, many others reach a point where they cannot live with their unhappiness any longer. And so their motivation to awaken becomes strong. For some people, you have to hit rock bottom before you can see the light, right? I had a friend, he was my roommate in grad school, who was an alcoholic. And it was only after he hit rock bottom, he told me this later, he said when he hit rock bottom, that he finally felt the need to go to AA. And he said the moment he walked into the first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, he said it was like a white light moment. It was not even like he had to work at it for years. It was just everything changed that day. But it was because he had hit rock bottom already. You see what I mean? And that was the case with Tolle himself, as we know. He was about to commit suicide. He was ready to commit suicide. Then he hit the rock bottom, and then he had that spiritual awakening. Bhagavad Gita, many of you are familiar with the text. What's the whole context of the Bhagavad Gita? The first chapter of the Gita is called Arjuna Vishada Yoga. The yoga of Arjuna's dejection, the yoga of Arjuna's depression. He's in the depths of sorrow, of abject sorrow, extreme anguish. And that's how his spiritual awakening begins. As Swami Medhananda used to say, suffering is the great eye-opener. So the pain body is also a great eye-opener. It's a great awakener. So I'll wrap up this talk by just giving a few practical suggestions with respect to the pain body. As spiritual aspirants, what should we do? First of all, I say this a lot, I'm going to say it again. We need to be honest with ourselves. So brutally honest self-assessment is really important in spiritual life, and especially in the context of the pain body. You should ask yourself very honestly, what is the nature of my pain body? What is its predominant negative emotion or feeling? When is my pain body triggered? Under what circumstances? When interacting with what people? What kind of people? And so on. What are the main triggers? Secondly, don't fight the pain body, because that'll be counterproductive. Just be mindful of it when it arises, when it gets triggered, when it gets activated. And, as I said, one of the most helpful aspects of Tolle's philosophy is that he treats it like a quasi-living entity, like a golem. So think of it that way, because that's a great way of breaking your identification with it. You see? You can just say, oh, that's the pain body again. Trying to get more food for itself. In a close relationship, give Tolle's books to your partner. Talk about his pain body with your partner. And then you can be frank about it. And in a moment of calm, not when you're already in a state of agitation or whatever, you're in a fight. And talk about it. Hey, what do you think, what's your pain body? What are its triggers? And you should start, first of all. If you're if you're already on board with Tolle, you start by talking about your own pain body. Then you can ask your partner, but what do you think is your pain body? What is it? When is it that what I say or do triggers your pain body? Another thing, as I said, one of the differences, at least in emphasis, between Tolle and the Vedantic tradition, our Vedantic tradition, is that our tradition encourages harmonizing all four yogas. Sri Aurobindo called it integral yoga. Swami Vivekananda talked about synthesizing the four yogas. And so, in this case, I think it's always helpful to keep in mind here. This is not something that Tolle himself emphasizes much, but I think Vedantins do, and we can take advantage of this. It's not a kind of be-all, end-all practice, this mindfulness thing, and it's often difficult. So we can combine mindfulness with prayer. And we can pray to God to help us in our efforts to break our identification with the pain body, to dissolve the pain body, to be more compassionate, more loving toward our loved ones. And finally, Tolle, back in 2005, when he wrote A New Earth, he talked about how the entertainment industry has an important role to play in intensifying our pain bodies, especially with violent films, Hollywood films. I think if you were to write the book now, he'd talk a lot about social media and the way that social media taps into our negative emotions, knows that it sells, and that it's the way to kind of make us, it forces us into this kind of negative echo chamber. And so if we're mindful in our use of social media, in our consumption of news, that's also a very helpful practical tip. And check when things like social media or news trigger your pain body. And just be mindful of that. All right, thank you very much.